My name is Judith and I'm 68 years old, and the day my grandson looked me in the eyes and called me finished was the day something inside me broke. I used to think the golden years would be peaceful. My husband Raymond and I built our small life on a hill in Vermont, surrounded by the scent of lilac and cedar. When he passed 3 years ago, I tried to keep the house just as he left it, his books still on the shelves, his favorite mug still on the counter. It gave me comfort, even when the nights turned long and the silence felt heavy. When my grandson Mason called and said he wanted to move in to help me out, I cried with gratitude. He was 25, my only grandchild, and his voice sounded so warm over the phone. He said he'd been struggling to find steady work and wanted to repay me for all I'd done. It sounded so sweet, so pure, that I welcomed him with open arms. At first, he was charming and attentive. He cooked breakfast on Sundays, fixed the gate that had squeaked for months, and sat beside me in the evenings watching the same old mystery shows his grandfather and I used to love. I remember thinking that maybe Raymond had sent him to keep me from loneliness. It was a nice thought until the niceness began to crack. It started small. He offered to handle the mail so I wouldn't have to walk to the road in bad weather. Then he asked for my checkbook to set up auto payments. I didn't think twice. I trusted him. But within weeks, I noticed bank letters I'd never seen before, and transactions I couldn't recall making. When I asked, he laughed and said, "Oh, Grandma, you don't need to worry about that old stuff. It's all digital now." That laugh was different from the one I knew. It had an edge, a hint of something mean. I let it go at first, telling myself I was being paranoid. But then he started locking my mail drawer and keeping the key on his keychain. He insisted the electric company and the bank both needed his name listed for safety reasons. It all felt off. One evening, I went to retrieve a bank statement while he was out. I found the drawer jammed shut. When he came home, I asked for the key. He rolled his eyes and said, "Grandma, please, you don't need to be checking up on me like that. You don't understand how this stuff works." His tone wasn't just dismissive, it was cold. I stood there with the teapot still in my hand, steam rising between us, and for the first time I saw how his eyes had changed. They used to be soft brown, like his mother's. Now they looked empty, like a window with the lights turned off. The next day, I found a credit card bill with my name on it for a purchase I never made, a $900 gaming console. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. He snatched the paper from my hands and said, "It's not like you're using your money for anything important." The words hit me like a slap. Before I could speak, he added quietly, "You're finished, Grandma. You don't even see it, do you? You're done with life. You should be grateful someone's taking care of you." I can still hear the sound of my own heartbeat in that moment. He was smiling as he said it, as though he was doing me a favor. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, at the boy I had once rocked to sleep, and I felt something inside me shift from hurt to resolve. After he went to bed, I sat in the dark living room, listening to the creak of the house. I thought about the years I spent teaching children to stand up for themselves, about the students who'd told me I'd given them a voice, and there I was, letting my own grandson erase mine. I could feel Raymond in the room with me, as if his hand were on my shoulder. He used to say, "Judith, if someone treats you like you're small, make yourself quiet long enough to watch them fall." I smiled through tears. Maybe I was old, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next morning I cooked his breakfast as usual. I made his coffee just how he liked it, 2 spoons of sugar and a dash of cream. He sat down with that smug look, scrolling through his phone. He didn't notice how steady my hands had become. He didn't see how I watched him the way a teacher watches a student before a test. I decided that day that I would learn everything he thought I was too old to understand: bank accounts, legal forms, passwords, property records. I'd pretend to be the forgetful old woman he believed me to be while I quietly built a plan strong enough to take back everything he'd tried to steal. He had no idea that the woman he just dismissed was about to show him what unfinished really looks like. After that night, the house felt colder, but my mind burned with something fierce. Mason thought his words had crushed me. He strutted around the next morning like a king in his castle, humming while I sat silently by the window. I didn't argue or question him anymore. I simply watched. Let him believe I was broken, it was the perfect disguise. The first step was to gather proof, Every morning after he left to meet friends, I searched quietly. I checked drawers, took photos of receipts, and wrote down every suspicious transaction I could find. My handwriting shook at times, but every letter mattered. I had spent decades teaching children how to document research, and now I was my own student. I started keeping a notebook hidden behind an old dictionary on the shelf. In it, I recorded everything: dates, amounts, the names on letters, the tone of his voice when he lied. My little log of truth. I even noted the nights he came home drunk and the people he brought along. He began inviting strangers over, loud young men with beer cans and loud music. They trampled through my living room, laughing and calling me, "Sweet old lady." I'd smile politely, excuse myself, and retreat to my bedroom, locking the door once I was inside. I could hear Mason, downstairs bragging, "Yeah, I'll be selling this place soon. Just need a few things to clear up with the paperwork." Each word dug deeper, but I said nothing. I recorded their conversations on a small voice recorder I found in my old teaching supplies. If Mason ever wondered why I never protested, it's because I'd already started to build a case he couldn't destroy. Still, nights were the hardest. The house groaned, and I'd wake up sweating, hearing his words again. "You're finished." I'd remind myself that Raymond used to say, "A calm sea never made a skilled sailor." I whispered that to myself until I drifted back to sleep. One morning, while Mason was still snoring on the couch, I tiptoed to the kitchen and searched through the drawer where he kept my mail. I found several letters addressed to Mr. Mason Miller Estate Contact. The phrase made my stomach twist. He was already acting as the owner of my home. I took photos of the envelopes and replaced them exactly where they'd been. That was the day I decided to call Mr. Barrett. He'd been my husband's lawyer for decades, a quiet, careful man with sharp eyes and a patient voice. I found his number tucked inside one of Raymond's old address books. When I called, his assistant said he was available that afternoon. I told Mason I had a doctor's appointment, and he barely looked up from his phone as he grunted, "Fine, whatever." On my walk to the bus stop, the autumn air bit at my cheeks, but I felt strangely alive. Every step away from that house was a step toward freedom. When I reached the law office, the familiar smell of paper and coffee hit me. Barrett looked older than I remembered, his hair silver now, but his eyes were just as sharp. "Judith," he said kindly, standing to shake my hand. "What brings you here after all these years?" I told him everything, every purchase, every insult, every twisted attempt to control me. When I finished, he sat quietly for a long time, fingers pressed together. "Finally," he said, "I'm afraid your grandson may be preparing to commit fraud, possibly even elder exploitation. You've done the right thing by coming to me." He advised me to continue acting as though I trusted Mason. "If he suspects you're onto him, he might escalate things," Barrett warned. He promised to start reviewing my property deeds, bank accounts, and will immediately. "And Judith," he added softly, "don't sign anything he gives you no matter what excuse he uses." I nodded. For the first time in months, I felt less like a victim and more like a participant in my own story. Barrett asked if he could make a few quiet legal adjustments just in case. I agreed. As I left the office, I passed a mirror near the lobby door. The woman staring back at me didn't look weak anymore. Her back was straighter, her chin higher. I smiled faintly. Maybe this was what it felt like to take your life back, one quiet choice at a time. Back home, I found Mason pacing in the kitchen. "Where were you?" he demanded. "You didn't answer your phone." I lied easily now. "Just the clinic. They wanted to adjust my blood pressure medicine." I waved a small prescription slip I'd picked up from the pharmacy as cover. He stared at me for a moment before shrugging. "You should tell me before you leave," he said coldly. "Of course, dear," I replied, my voice sugar-sweet. He walked away, muttering something about old people and their pills. I waited until I heard his door close before allowing myself to exhale. That night, I couldn't sleep. The moonlight poured through the window, and I sat up listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Somewhere between the ticking of the clock and the whisper of the wind, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. The next morning, I made Mason breakfast as usual. He grunted his thanks, scrolling through his phone, completely unaware that, every moment of his arrogance was strengthening me. I smiled and thought of the papers Barrett would soon draft. I would bide my time. I would smile when he mocked me, thank him when he insulted me, nod when he lied. Every word he spoke would become another thread in the web he didn't realize I was weaving. He thought I was losing my memory, but I was only sharpening it for the day I'd need it most. The next morning, I took my cane, put on my best coat, and walked straight into Mr. Barrett's office. The air outside carried a sharp chill that morning, but it couldn't compare to the cold I'd been living with under my own roof. Mason thought I was too frail to leave the house alone, too absent-minded to handle appointments. That made my every step toward Barrett's office feel like rebellion. I took the long way through town, passing the bakery that still sold the same cinnamon rolls Raymond used to love. For the first time in a long while, I let myself smile. When I entered Barrett's law office, he rose immediately, surprised but genuinely glad to see me again. "Judith, my dear," he said warmly, motioning to the chair across from him. "You look well. What brings you here?" "I wish it were a pleasant visit," I replied, setting my handbag down carefully. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to say. "It's about my grandson, Mason. I think he's trying to take everything I have." Barrett's brow furrowed. He listened without interrupting as I described the months of manipulation, the hidden mail, the unauthorized purchases, and the arrogance that had seeped into every word Mason spoke. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed in thought. "Judith," he said slowly, "you've done the right thing coming here. I believe Mason may be attempting to gain control of your estate. I've seen cases like this, family members preying on elders through emotional and financial coercion. It's ugly business." His voice softened. "You still have full legal authority over your estate, correct?" "Yes," I said. "For now." "Then we must make sure it stays that way." He pulled a folder from his drawer and began scribbling notes. "First," he said, "we'll review your current will. We'll also ensure all property deeds and accounts are secure. If Mason's already been making inquiries or attempting to alter documents, we'll find out." I nodded, feeling the first glimmer of safety I'd felt in months. Barrett reached for the phone and called his assistant, instructing her to gather my files from the archive. While she was gone, he said quietly, "If he's controlling your finances, he might try to convince you to sign something, a transfer, a power of attorney, even a fake deed. Under no circumstances should you sign anything he gives you, no matter how urgent he makes it sound." "I won't," I promised. When his assistant returned, Barrett opened the folder and began flipping through old documents. He paused at a page and frowned. "Here," he said, pointing to a note dated only 2 weeks prior. "There's been an inquiry made under Mason's name. Someone asked about updating the estate ownership status. They claimed to represent you." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "He's already trying to take the house," I whispered. Barrett gave a slow nod. "Most likely. But don't worry, Judith. That gives us leverage. If he files anything fraudulent, we'll have proof he acted without consent. In the meantime, we'll prepare something stronger, a new will, with updated protections." I asked what that would entail, and he smiled faintly. "It will ensure that if anything happens to you, Mason can't touch your property, funds, or assets. You can leave everything where it should go, charities, trusts, whatever you choose. And we'll do it quietly. I want him to have nothing," I said softly. "He's already taken enough from me." Barrett nodded. "Then nothing he shall have." He printed out preliminary documents for my review. I wasn't ready to sign yet, but I read every line carefully, just as Raymond taught me. Barrett also advised me to create a log of every interaction with Mason, what he said, what he did, and any witnesses present. I smiled faintly. "Already ahead of you," I said, pulling out my small notebook. He chuckled. "You've always been one step ahead, Judith." As I stood to leave, he handed me a card. "My direct number," he said. "Day or night, you call me if he pressures you or brings you papers. Don't hesitate." "I won't," I promised. Outside, the wind had softened, and the sun peeked through the clouds. I felt lighter, though the cane in my hand reminded me of my years. I stopped by a flower shop on the way home and bought a single white lily, Raymond's favorite. It felt like a quiet declaration of strength. When I returned, Mason was in the driveway, leaning against his car with that impatient smirk. "Where've you been?" he asked sharply. I smiled, holding up the small paper bag with the flower inside. "Just out for some air, the florist had a sale." He eyed me suspiciously but didn't press further. "Next time, let me know before you wander off. You could get hurt." "I'll remember that," I said sweetly. As he stomped back inside, I planted the lily in the front garden. The soil was cold, but it felt good to push my hands into it, to reclaim something simple that was mine. I whispered a small prayer, more for courage than anything else. That night, Mason cooked dinner for the first time in weeks. He was oddly quiet, barely meeting my eyes. Maybe he sensed something had shifted. Maybe he didn't. I sat across from him, sipping my soup slowly, hiding the faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. I thought of Barrett's calm words, of the new will being drafted, and of the papers that would soon carry my real signature, one that would protect everything I loved. For the first time in months, I walked home with purpose instead of pain. When I got home that afternoon, Mason was waiting in the doorway like a snake guarding its prey. His arms were crossed, and his jaw was tight. The moment I stepped through the door, I could feel the temperature in the house drop. "Where were you?" he demanded, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. I steadied my breathing and forced a gentle smile. "I told you, dear. I went out to pick up a few things for the garden. The weather's been so kind lately." He narrowed his eyes. "Garden? You were gone for hours, Grandma." I lifted the small bag with flower bulbs I'd bought on the way home. "You can check if you don't believe me." His expression softened just a little, but his tone stayed laced with irritation. "You should tell me where you're going. You can't just wander around like that. What if something happened?" "Oh, Mason," I said lightly. "I've lived through 6 decades of something happening. I think I can manage the market." He didn't appreciate the joke. His eyes flicked to my handbag, the one I'd taken to Barrett's office. For a moment, I thought he might snatch it from me, but instead, he turned away. "Next time, just tell me," he muttered. I nodded and slipped into my room, closing the door quietly behind me. My hands trembled as I set my bag down. But it wasn't fear, it was anger, controlled and sharpened like a knife. He was watching me too closely now. Over the next few days, his behavior worsened. Mason started walking into my room without knocking, claiming he was checking if I was okay. He unplugged the landline, saying no one used them anymore, and installed cameras in the hallway under the excuse of home security. I pretended to be flattered that he cared so much. One evening, I overheard him talking to someone on the phone. His voice was low, but I caught enough to understand. "Yeah, it's basically mine already," he said. "Old lady's slowing down. I just need her to sign a couple more things. The house is worth double what I expected." My heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't make a sound. I stayed in the kitchen, stirring my tea, waiting for him to leave. As soon as he did, I found my old smartphone in a drawer, the one with a cracked screen, and started recording audio whenever he had guests over. I set it up on the bookshelf, hidden behind a stack of photo frames. Days turned into a quiet dance of deception. He'd try to provoke me, asking if I remembered where I kept my bank book or if I was getting forgetful lately. I'd respond with a polite laugh, pretending to lose track of words or dates. If he thought I was slipping, he'd let his guard down further. But even pretending to be weak takes strength. Every insult he threw became another brick in the wall I was building between us. He couldn't see it, but I was separating my life from his, one detail at a time, moving small valuables out of reach, storing jewelry in old cookie tins buried beneath the garden shed. The more he believed I was helpless, the safer I became. One night, he came home drunk. The front door slammed, and I could hear him stumble through the hall. "You should be asleep," he shouted suddenly, as though I'd done something wrong. I lied. "You woke me up." He leaned in close, his breath heavy with alcohol. "You know, Grandma," he sneered. You should be grateful I'm here. No one else wants to take care of you. Everyone else thinks you're a burden. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, keeping my face blank, the way you'd look at a wild animal you didn't want to startle. He laughed, a cold, mean sound, and stumbled toward his room. After he left, I turned off the recorder and saved the file. Every cruel word, every threat, it was all there now. A few days later, Mason's arrogance began to show outside the house too. The neighbors noticed. My friend and neighbor, Mrs. Carmine, mentioned one morning that she'd overheard him bragging to the mail carrier about getting a big inheritance soon. I thanked her quietly and told her not to mention it to him. Just keep an eye out, I said. She nodded, concern flickering in her eyes. The evidence was stacking up: bank statements, recordings, and witnesses. Still, I knew this wasn't enough. Not yet. I'd need something undeniable, a final act that would expose him beyond question. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I sat by the window, looking at the faint reflection of my face in the glass. My wrinkles caught the moonlight, and for the first time, I didn't see weakness in them. I saw history. I saw endurance. I saw a woman who'd raised a son, buried a husband, and now stood toe-to-toe with betrayal. Mason might think he was the smartest one in the house, but he hadn't learned what every teacher knows. It's never wise to underestimate the quiet ones. He thought I was trapped, but I was already digging my way out. Sometimes revenge needs patience, and I had plenty of that left. I woke up the next morning with a calm I hadn't felt in months. Mason's voice still echoed faintly in my mind from the night before, but instead of fear, it fueled me. I spent my life teaching children to think before reacting, to strategize instead of lash out, and now those lessons were my lifeline. The first thing I needed to do was regain control over my finances without tipping him off. I waited until Mason announced he was heading into town with his friends. Once I heard his car engine fade down the road, I grabbed my cane, my purse, and the envelope of bank letters I'd been collecting. At the bank, the manager, a kind man named Mr. Dawson, looked concerned when he saw me. "Mrs. Miller, is everything all right? We don't usually see you here anymore." I smiled faintly. "I wanted to make sure everything's in order. I've been noticing some strange charges lately." When I showed him the documents, his face hardened. These accounts have been accessed from a different IP address, and several withdrawals were made by someone listed as an authorized user, Mason Miller. Was that intentional? My stomach tightened, though I'd expected the answer. "No," I said. "It wasn't." He nodded. "We'll secure your account immediately and issue new cards. I'll put a temporary freeze in place and notify our fraud department. You'll need to sign a few documents to confirm the dispute." I signed carefully, my hand steady. It was the first time I'd used my signature not to protect Mason but to protect myself. Mr. Dawson assured me that I'd be contacted only directly by him from now on, no intermediaries. When I returned home, Mason was already there, pacing in the kitchen. "What did you do?" he snapped. I feigned confusion. "What do you mean, dear?" "The bank called," he said, his voice rising. "They froze the account. I couldn't pay the bills or buy groceries." "Oh, that must be a mistake," I said softly, pretending to fumble with my keys. "I'll go in tomorrow and see what happened." He stared at me for a long moment, jaw clenched, then stormed into his room and slammed the door. I stood there, listening to the echo fade through the house. Every slam, every stomp, music to my ears. It meant he was losing control. That evening, I called Mr. Barrett from the old rotary phone I'd reconnected in my room. He listened carefully as I described the situation. "Excellent," he said. "You've taken the first step. Now, let's move on to the next part." "The will?" I asked. "Yes, we'll rewrite it completely. Mason will not inherit the estate or any portion of your funds. Instead, it will go to Raymond's Education Foundation and the local literacy trust. You mentioned he's still expecting to control the house, correct?" "He talks about it constantly," I said, "like he already owns it." "Good," Barrett replied. "Let him keep thinking that. When the time comes, we'll have every legal safeguard in place. He'll never see it coming. I could hear the faint clack of his pen as he took notes. Also, he added, I suggest leaving a small conditional trust for Mason. Something that appears generous on paper, but has strict terms: employment, rehabilitation, community service. He won't qualify, but it will look fair to any outside observer. I smiled. You really have done this before, haven't you? He chuckled softly. Unfortunately, yes. Greed often wears a familiar face. When I hung up, I felt lighter. The next few days, I played my part flawlessly. I made Mason's favorite meals, laughed at his jokes, and acted every bit the docile grandmother he wanted. Meanwhile, Barrett prepared the new legal documents, ensuring everything was filed quietly. Mason, unaware of the storm brewing, began to relax again. His tone softened, and he even offered to take me to the grocery store, something he hadn't done in months. I went along, letting him believe he was in control. But one afternoon, while he was out, I sat at the kitchen table signing Barrett's prepared documents. Each signature felt like another stitch mending the fabric of my dignity. When the last page was done, I stared at my name written in blue ink and smiled. Raymond would have been proud. The very next morning, Mason strutted into the kitchen with a satisfied grin. Good news, Grandma, he said. I've got a plan to lower your property taxes. I'll handle all the forms, you just need to sign a few papers later this week. I looked up, meeting his eyes. That sounds wonderful, dear. I'm so lucky to have you, helping me. He smiled, clearly pleased with himself. You sure are, he said, his arrogance bleeding through. Inside, I was laughing. He had no idea that while he was busy planning to steal from me, I'd already locked him out of every account and signed away his future inheritance to charity. He was still playing a game that had ended days ago. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the sunset cast a golden hue across the fields. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. I thought about how Raymond and I used to sit here, planning our garden for spring. I whispered, "You'd be proud of me, Ray." I didn't let him win. Still, I knew this wasn't over. Mason was impulsive and arrogant but not stupid. When he realized the walls were closing in, he'd fight back harder. I needed to be ready for that. So, I began to plan again. I stored my documents in a small fireproof box and hid it beneath the floorboard in the guest room. I started keeping my purse beside me at all times, even while sleeping. Every move was deliberate, every act a step closer to justice. When I saw him pacing that night, muttering to himself about missing money and stupid banks, I felt almost sorry for him. Almost. But pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. I had my proof, my lawyer, my plan, and my patience. Mason thought this was still his game, but what he didn't understand was that I had already rewritten the rules. He didn't know the signature he wanted most was the one that would destroy him. Mason's mask began to slip the moment he realized he couldn't access my money. It happened 2 mornings after the bank froze my account. I was sitting at the breakfast table, buttering my toast, when he stormed in with his phone in hand. His voice shook with rage. The account's still locked. I couldn't even pay the electric bill because of your stupid mistake. I looked up calmly. I'm sure it's just a mix-up, dear. I'll visit the bank later this week. Don't bother, he spat. You'll just make things worse. He snatched his keys and left the house without another word, the door slamming behind him so hard it rattled the windows. I sat still, watching the butter melt into my toast. His anger didn't scare me, it confirmed what I already knew. The more desperate he became, the more careless he'd get. By that evening, Mason's entire demeanor had changed. The charm he once used to mask his greed was gone. He stopped talking to me unless he needed something. He began forgetting to buy groceries and leaving unpaid bills on the counter, mumbling about how I should take care of them myself since I messed everything up. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly invisible in your own home. He treated me like a ghost. But ghosts have their advantages, they see everything. The weather turned colder, and one night, the heat didn't come on. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat by the small fireplace, staring into the flickering flames. My husband's old photograph sat on the mantel, his warm smile frozen in time. "I'm all right, Ray," I whispered. "Just a few more steps." The next day, I decided to expand my circle of quiet allies. My neighbor, Mrs. Carmine, came by with a basket of muffins. She was one of those women who noticed things without having to be told. When I opened the door, she frowned. "You look pale, Judith. Is everything okay?" I hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Just a bit tired. Mason's been difficult lately." Her eyes narrowed. "I've seen him shouting in the yard. If anything happens, you come straight to me, you understand?" "I will," I promised. "But could I ask a small favor?" "Of course. If you see anything unusual, visitors, deliveries, anything, just jot it down for me." She gave me a firm nod. "Consider it done." That small act of kindness became another thread in my safety net. I couldn't rely on confrontation, but I could rely on preparation. That night, Mason brought home papers in a manila folder. He placed them on the table beside my dinner plate. "You need to sign these, Grandma," he said, his tone tight but polite. "It's just some medical forms. It'll make things easier for me to handle your prescriptions." I picked up the top page and adjusted my glasses. The title read, "Power of Attorney for Medical and Financial Affairs." My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral. "That's a lot of words for medicine forms," I said softly. "It's just standard stuff," he said quickly. "You wouldn't understand all the legal jargon. Just sign at the bottom, and we'll be fine." I gave a shaky laugh. "Oh, you know me. Always slow with these things. Let me think on it tonight, all right?" He hesitated, studying me. Then he forced a smile. "Sure, Grandma. Tomorrow morning, okay?" As soon as he went to bed, I carefully slipped the document into a different folder and replaced it with blank paper that looked similar in color. I then made a copy of the original on my old printer and hid it beneath my mattress. The next morning, when he asked for it, I handed him the folder with the blank sheets. "I changed my mind," I said sweetly. "You were right, it's fine. I trust you." He grinned, satisfied, and took it without checking. That afternoon, I called Barrett and told him what had happened. His tone turned grave. "That's attempted fraud, Judith. He's trying to take complete control. We'll need to escalate this." "What should I do?" "Continue playing along. Don't sign anything legitimate, no matter what. I'll contact law enforcement if he tries again." By evening, Mason's attitude grew darker. When he discovered that the medical form wasn't processing, he accused me of ruining it somehow. "You must have done something wrong," he shouted. "You're always messing things up." "I'm sorry, dear," I said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." He slammed his fist on the counter so hard that the teacup beside me cracked. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. I didn't flinch. I'd faced worse storms. The next day, he changed tactics. He started talking sweet again, offering to make me tea, bringing me flowers from the store, smiling as though nothing had happened. It was almost comical how transparent it was. Predators always act polite before they pounce again. Late that night, I heard him outside my room, whispering to someone on the phone. His tone was low, but I caught fragments. "She's signing soon. I won't remember a thing. Once it's done, I'll sell fast." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, I decided, would be the day I stopped reacting and started acting again. I woke before dawn, packed my documents, and prepared for another visit to Barrett. I needed the next move ready, the one that would end this game for good. Mason wouldn't know it yet, but I was about to make him hand me the weapon that would undo everything he'd built. He didn't realize the final paper he'd push under my nose would be the last one he ever wanted me to sign. It was a Friday morning when Mason came to me, smiling with a folder in his hands. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to knit, when he appeared in the doorway. He looked calm, almost pleasant, the way he used to when he first moved in. But there was something behind that smile now, a gleam of triumph. "Morning, Grandma," he said cheerfully. "I've got something for you to look over. Should only take a minute." I looked up slowly, setting my knitting aside. "Oh? What is it this time?" Just a simple update for the property taxes, he said smoothly. They've changed some paperwork rules. I talked to the city office yesterday. It's a routine. You just need to sign so I can handle the filing. He said it so casually, so confidently, that any outsider might have believed him. But I knew that smile. It was the same one he wore when he'd told his friends he'd own my house soon. I adjusted my glasses and opened the folder. My eyes scanned the page, my name, my address, the words transfer of ownership for administrative processing. There it was, the trap. I murmured, pretending to squint. You know these things confuse me, Mason. I'll just trust you. He grinned wider. Exactly, Grandma. It's just paperwork. You sign there, and I'll take care of the rest. My hand trembled, not from nerves, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I picked up the pen and paused, looking him straight in the eye. Right here? Right there, he said eagerly, tapping the line. I signed, my pen gliding across the paper. But I didn't write Judith Miller. I wrote exactly what Barrett had told me to. Judith Miller, as per legal counsel authorization, signature pending verification. It looked harmless enough, something an old woman might write if she were overly cautious. But legally, it meant the document was invalid unless verified by my attorney. It was, in essence, a signature that would destroy any attempt to forge or... When I handed the paper back, Mason's grin widened like he'd just won a lottery. Perfect. I'll drop it off downtown this afternoon. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. That's wonderful, dear. I'm proud of how responsible you've become. He laughed, stuffing the folder into his bag. See, Grandma? I told you I'd take care of everything. As soon as his car disappeared down the road, I picked up the phone and called Barrett. He answered on the second ring. It's done, I said simply. You signed it the way we discussed? Exactly. Good, he said. Bring the details to me this afternoon. I'll contact the registrar's office before he even arrives. If he tries to file anything, it'll be flagged immediately. And Judith, make sure you stay calm. Don't let him know you're ahead of him. I've been calm for months, I said, a quiet smile forming on my lips. When I hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, listening to the clock tick. The tension that had gripped me for so long began to ease, replaced by a kind of heavy stillness. The war was nearly over. A few hours later, Mason burst through the door. His smile was gone. What the hell did you do? I looked up from my teacup. What's wrong, dear? They wouldn't process the form, he snapped. They said something about legal verification pending. What does that mean? I tilted my head. Oh, maybe it's something the lawyer mentioned when he helped Raymond and me set up the property years ago. He said all my signatures go through him first. He stared at me, his face paling. You talked to a lawyer? Oh, years ago, I said lightly. I barely remember. His fists clenched. You're lying. I sipped my tea slowly. You shouldn't talk to your grandmother that way. For a moment, I thought he might throw something. His hands shook, and his jaw tightened, but he held back. You think you're clever, he said through gritted teeth. You think you can outsmart me? You can't even remember what you had for breakfast most days. Oh, I remember plenty, I said softly. I just don't always show it. He glared at me for a long, silent moment before storming off to his room. I could hear drawers slamming and furniture scraping as he tore through his things in frustration. He didn't understand that his game was already over. The papers were invalid, and Barrett's office had already alerted the authorities. That night, I heard him pacing the hall. Every few minutes, his footsteps stopped outside my door. I didn't move. I just lay there, breathing evenly, pretending to sleep. He muttered something under his breath, something I couldn't quite catch, but I didn't need to. The venom in his tone told me enough. The next morning, Barrett called again. Everything's confirmed, he said. He tried to process the form under your name. It's now officially marked as fraudulent. The authorities will monitor his actions closely. You've won, Judith. Just keep your head down a little longer. I thanked him quietly and hung up. Then I walked to the window and watched Mason pacing in the yard, phone pressed to his ear, anger radiating off him in waves. He was unraveling, and all I had to do was watch. As the sun set that evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, my first in months, and whispered to the photo of Raymond on the mantel, "We did it, Ray. He just doesn't know it yet." The last signature he thought would make him rich was the one that sealed his fate. For 2 weeks, I played the role of the beaten grandmother perfectly. Mason believed his little plan had simply hit a bureaucratic snag. He stopped shouting and returned to pretending everything was fine. But I could see the cracks forming in his confidence. He was quieter now, more distracted. The phone calls became more frequent, the whispers more desperate. Every time he hung up, I could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a dying fire. I knew better than to press. Instead, I fell deeper into my performance. I let my shoulders slump, let my hands shake when I poured tea, and sometimes even forgot what day it was. I apologized when I didn't need to. I laughed at his weak jokes. I became exactly what he wanted me to be, an old woman losing her grasp on reality. It worked. He started leaving the house again, staying out late, confident that I wouldn't do anything. He didn't realize that every hour he was gone gave me time to prepare more evidence. I began sorting through the last few pieces of my quiet puzzle. Each day, I documented the calls he received, the people who came by, and the growing list of items disappearing from the house. It started with small things: silver spoons, framed photographs, Raymond's old watch. Then I noticed he was listing furniture online. I found one of his listings by accident: my dining table, the one I'd owned for 40 years, photographed and posted for sale. I didn't confront him. I simply took screenshots, printed them, and filed them neatly in my evidence folder. Barrett called often, checking in. "Everything's working perfectly," he said one evening. The more he acts, the more he incriminates himself. The fraudulent form alone could put him in serious trouble. But the financial evidence will seal it. "What should I do in the meantime?" I asked. He paused. "Nothing. Just stay safe, stay quiet, and keep recording." So I did. Mrs. Carmine continued to help too. She'd wave at me from her porch when Mason left, then later slip notes under my fence, small scraps of paper with times, dates, and descriptions of visitors. It comforted me to know I wasn't alone. The calm before any storm always feels strange, like the world is holding its breath. The house was peaceful again, but not in the way it used to be. It wasn't warmth anymore, it was anticipation. I could feel it in the walls, in the slow ticking of the clock, in the creak of the floorboards when I walked through the hall. One afternoon, while Mason was out, I sat at the kitchen table going through his discarded mail. Among the piles of junk, I found a folded sheet addressed to him. It was a notice of debt collection, thousands of dollars owed for unpaid credit cards. My heart sank. He wasn't just greedy, he was drowning. And people like Mason, when they start to drown, they grab whoever's nearest. That night, I heard him yelling on the phone again. "I said I'll have the money soon. Just give me a few days." His voice cracked with panic. Then came the sound of something shattering a glass, maybe a vase. I stayed in my room, clutching my phone, recording every word. The next morning, he acted as though nothing had happened. "Morning, Grandma," he said too brightly. "Want me to make pancakes?" I smiled faintly. That would be nice. We sat at the table like any other family, except for the tension that hovered between us like fog. He kept glancing toward the door, waiting for a call, his leg bouncing under the table. I ate in silence, pretending not to notice. Later that day, Mrs. Carmine came by to drop off a casserole. Her eyes darted nervously toward Mason's car parked out front. "Everything okay?" she whispered when he wasn't in sight. "Everything's right on track," I said softly. "Just a little longer." That evening, I caught Mason in the living room going through my drawers. He jumped when he saw me standing in the doorway. "I was just looking for some batteries," he said quickly. "Of course," I said, smiling sweetly. "You always know where everything is." He froze, sensing something in my tone. But before he could respond, I added, "By the way, I made soup. Don't let it get cold." He stared at me a moment longer before walking past, muttering under his breath. I stood there, heart steady, knowing he'd crossed another invisible line. The next morning, I called Barrett again. He's selling furniture, taking things, and he's clearly in debt, I reported. Barrett sighed. It's time, Judith. I've already prepared the full legal package: bank records, audio evidence, the forged form, witness statements. We'll submit everything to the district attorney's office tomorrow. Tomorrow? I repeated. Yes. Once the report is filed, they'll begin the process. He'll be questioned, maybe even arrested, depending on what they find, but you must act as though nothing's happening. Don't worry, I said with a small laugh. I've gotten quite good at that. That night, I set the dining table like I always used to, with candles, clean plates, and soft music playing on the old radio. Mason looked surprised when he walked in. What's all this? He asked. I thought we should have dinner together, I said. It's been a while. He eyed me suspiciously, then shrugged and sat down. We ate in silence, the faint hum of the radio filling the space. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. When he finished eating, he stood and said flatly, I've got somewhere to be, before grabbing his coat and heading out the door. I watched him leave, the taillights disappearing into the dark. I sat alone at the table for a long time after that, the flicker of the candle reflecting off the window pane. The silence around me was heavy but calm, like the eye of a storm passing overhead. I knew that soon, the calm would break, and when it did, it wouldn't be me caught in the wreckage. I had lived my whole life teaching lessons, and now my student was about to learn his hardest one yet. The letter came early one morning, a legal summons addressed to Mason. It arrived in a plain white envelope, the kind that looks harmless until you feel the weight of it. Mason was still asleep on the couch, snoring loudly, an empty beer bottle balanced on the coffee table beside him. I picked up the envelope from the doorstep and saw his name typed neatly across the front. From the return address, I already knew who it was from the county courthouse. I placed it on the kitchen table where he'd be sure to see it, then went about my morning as usual. I made coffee, fed the cat, and watered the plants by the window. By the time he stumbled into the room, the smell of fresh coffee had filled the air. What's this? He muttered, grabbing the envelope. I don't know, I said lightly. It came this morning. He tore it open, scanned the first few lines, and froze. His lips moved as he read silently, and the color drained from his face. Then his eyes darted up to mine. What did you do? He whispered. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. What do you mean, dear? He slammed the paper onto the table. This is from the court. They're accusing me of fraud, of forgery. They're saying I filed fake property documents. How the hell do they know? I calmly stirred sugar into my coffee. That sounds serious. His voice rose, raw and panicked. You think this is funny? You think this is some kind of game? No. Mason, I said evenly, meeting his gaze. Games have rules. You broke every one. He stared at me, mouth slightly open as if seeing me for the first time. Then the anger hit. You went to someone, didn't you? A lawyer? The bank? You set me up. I protected myself, I said simply. There's a difference. He began pacing, clutching the letter, muttering curses under his breath. You can't do this to me. I'm family. That's exactly why it hurts so much that you did it to me first. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the tick of the clock and his heavy breathing. Then, without another word, he stormed out, slamming the front door so hard that a framed photo fell from the wall. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the hallway. I bent down slowly, picking up the picture. It was one of Raymond and me, smiling on our wedding day. I brushed off the shards carefully and whispered, It's almost over, love. That afternoon, a police car pulled into the driveway. 2 officers stepped out. Crisp uniforms and calm faces. Mason had just returned home, and when he saw them, his expression shifted from anger to disbelief. Mr. Mason Miller, one of them said. We'd like to ask you a few questions about a case involving fraudulent property documents and unauthorized access to financial accounts. Mason's voice cracked. This is ridiculous. My grandmother's confused. She doesn't know what she's talking about. One officer's gaze flicked toward me. Ma'am, would you be willing to give a statement? Of course, I said softly, handing them the folder I'd been compiling for months: bank records, recordings, photographs, and copies of every false document he'd attempted to use. As the officers leafed through the evidence, Mason's face turned from red to pale gray. You've been spying on me? He stammered. I've been protecting what's mine, I replied. Something you should have learned how to do, instead of taking from others. He took a step toward me, eyes wild. You ruined my life, one of the officers gently blocked him. Sir, please step back. I looked straight at him and said, You did that yourself, Mason. I just stopped you before you could ruin mine, too. The officers escorted him to the police car. He turned once more before getting in, his eyes full of hatred and disbelief. You're going to regret this, he hissed. I shook my head slowly. No, dear. Regret is for people who wish they hadn't done the right thing. The door shut with a heavy thud, and the car pulled away. For the first time in months, the house was silent, truly silent. I sat down at the kitchen table, hands trembling, not from fear, but from release. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long finally lifted. Mrs. Carmine came over an hour later, having seen the police cars. Judith, she whispered, eyes wide. Are you all right? I'm fine, I said softly. Better than I've been in a long time. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. I don't know how you stayed so calm. I smiled faintly. When you've spent a lifetime teaching, you learn that raising your voice rarely gets results. That night, as I sat in my chair, by the fire, I listened to the crackle of the wood and the hum of the quiet house. My home, finally felt like it belonged to me again. No tension, no deceit, just peace. I picked up my notebook, the one that had started this entire journey, and flipped to the last page. I wrote a single line: Justice is not about revenge, it's about remembering your worth when someone tries to take it away. The next morning, Barrett called to update me. He's being held for questioning, he said. They have enough evidence to charge him. You did it, Judith. Did I? I asked quietly. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like the end of something I never wanted to lose. He sighed. Sometimes endings are what give us peace. I thanked him, hung up, and looked out the window. The autumn leaves had started to fall, swirling across the lawn like gold dust. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the wind. As the police car drove away, I finally exhaled for the first time in months. The courtroom felt colder than I expected, but my resolve never wavered. The trial began 3 months after Mason's arrest. Winter had settled over Vermont, and the courthouse stood like a solemn monument against the snow. I walked slowly up the steps with Barrett beside me, his hand lightly guiding my arm. The marble floors inside echoed every footstep, each sound a reminder that this was real, that my grandson had brought us here. When the bailiff called the case, I sat down behind Barrett at the front of the courtroom. Mason was led in through a side door, his wrists cuffed. He looked thinner, his face drawn and pale. For a brief second, my heart ached the way only a grandmother's could. I remembered holding him as a baby, his tiny hand gripping my finger. But then I remembered the forged documents, the lies, the cruelty. Compassion didn't mean blindness. Mason avoided looking at me at first. When he finally did, his eyes were full of a mixture of anger and disbelief. He still didn't understand that this wasn't my vengeance, it was his consequence. The prosecutor began by presenting the evidence. The fraudulent transfer form. The audio recordings of his threats. The bank reports. The screenshots of his online listings. Each piece was like a nail in the coffin he'd built for himself. Barrett's voice was steady when he took the stand. Mrs. Miller came to me months ago, concerned about her grandson's behavior. She provided consistent documentation, all of which we verified independently. There was no confusion. She knew precisely what she was doing. The defense attorney tried to paint a different picture. He called Mason to testify, and as he took the stand, his voice was trembling but defiant. I wasn't trying to hurt her. Mason said, looking toward the jury. I was trying to help her. She's not well, she forgets things, gets confused. I was just trying to manage things for her before she made mistakes. Barrett leaned in and whispered to me, "This won't last long." The prosecutor stood and began cross-examining. "Mr. Miller, is it helping when you falsify documents to transfer property to your own name?" I didn't. "Is it helping when you spend thousands from her bank account without consent?" I thought, "Is it helping when you threaten to put your grandmother in a nursing home so you can sell her house?" Mason's mouth opened, but no words came. The prosecutor continued, his tone calm but sharp. "You recorded yourself bragging about inheriting the house before your grandmother was even gone. Was that part of your help, too?" The courtroom fell silent. Mason looked down at his hands, his face flushing red. When it was my turn to testify, my cane clicked softly against the floor as I walked to the stand. The judge gave me a kind nod. "Take your time, Mrs. Miller." I adjusted the microphone and began. "I loved my grandson," I said quietly. "I still do. In a way. But love doesn't excuse betrayal. I taught him to be honest, to take responsibility, to respect others. Somewhere along the way, he forgot those lessons. I didn't want this to happen. I just wanted to keep my home, my independence, and my peace." The defense attorney tried to rattle me. "Mrs. Miller, you said your grandson called you names. Is it possible you misheard him?" I looked him straight in the eye. "No, when someone you love tells you you're finished, you don't forget the sound of it." He hesitated, then sat down without another question. After my testimony, Barrett leaned close and whispered, "You handled that beautifully." The judge called for a short recess. As I walked back to my seat, Mason's eyes followed me. For a fleeting moment, I saw something there that looked like regret, but it was buried too deep to matter. When court resumed, the prosecution summarized everything neatly. "This case is not about confusion. It's about exploitation, emotional and financial. Mason Miller used his grandmother's trust as a weapon, and when she refused to surrender, he tried to steal from her. Justice demands accountability." The jury deliberated for nearly 3 hours. I sat quietly, hands folded, listening to the distant hum of the courthouse hallway. My stomach twisted with conflicting emotions: fear, sadness, relief. When the bailiff finally returned, everyone stood. "Have you reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The foreman nodded. "We have, Your Honor. We find the defendant, Mason Miller, guilty on all counts: attempted fraud, elder exploitation, and forgery." The sound of those words didn't bring joy. It brought peace. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I'd been holding for nearly a year. Mason's head dropped into his hands. When the judge pronounced his sentence, 2 years in state prison, plus restitution, he didn't look up. Afterward, as the courtroom emptied, I stood and looked at him one last time. He finally raised his eyes to meet mine. There was no more defiance, no more anger, just a hollow sadness. For a moment, I almost wanted to comfort him. But then I remembered the fear he'd put in me. The loneliness. The humiliation. Barrett touched my shoulder gently. "You did the right thing, Judith. Justice isn't always kind, but it's necessary." "I know," I said softly. He needed to learn that every signature has a price. We left the courtroom together, the cold winter air biting at our faces. As we walked to his car, snowflakes began to fall, light, gentle, and endless. It felt like a cleansing. When the gavel struck, it didn't just end his trial, it ended my silence. After the verdict, the house finally felt like mine again. For months, the air inside had been thick with fear and tension, like walking through a storm that refused to pass. But after the trial, everything changed. When I walked through the front door that evening, it felt lighter, quieter, mine. I stood in the middle of the living room, my cane tapping softly on the hardwood floor, and took in the space that had once been filled with Mason's shouting, his presence looming over everything. Now, there was only the sound of the old grandfather clock ticking steadily, like the heartbeat of the house coming back to life. I spent the first week cleaning every corner, not out of necessity, but as a kind of ritual, washing away the memories he'd left behind. I scrubbed the kitchen counters until they gleamed, dusted the shelves, and rearranged the furniture the way Raymond liked it. When I found Mason's old jacket hanging behind the door, I folded it neatly and packed it into a box. Barrett had arranged for all the legal documents to be finalized. The property was now completely secured under my name, protected from any further claims. He came by one afternoon with the final paperwork. "It's all official now," he said with a small smile. "He can't touch a thing." I signed the last page, and he handed me a copy. "What will you do now, Judith?" he asked gently. I said, glancing out the window at the garden. "It's time to start over." Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding the life Mason had nearly stolen from me. I donated several items to charity: the television he bought with my money, the expensive speakers he'd installed in the living room. I didn't want reminders of his greed in my home. Then, I turned my attention to something far more meaningful. Raymond's foundation, the small scholarship we'd created years ago for struggling students, had almost gone dormant after his death. I met with the local education board and arranged for a portion of my assets to fund its revival. Seeing the foundation's name in the paper again, the Raymond Miller Learning Grant, filled me with a quiet pride. Mrs. Carmine became a regular visitor. Every Friday afternoon she'd bring over a pot of soup or freshly baked bread, and we'd sit by the fire talking about everything from neighborhood gossip to gardening. "You're glowing again," she said once with a smile. "You look 20 years younger," I laughed softly. Peace does that to a person. In between visits, I spent time in the garden. The soil was cold, but the rhythm of it, the digging, the planting, the watering brought me back to myself. I planted tulips along the walkway, just like Raymond used to. For the first time in a long while, I could picture spring coming again. One morning, as I sipped tea by the window, a letter arrived. The handwriting was familiar, careful, slanted. It was from my son, Patrick. My heart clenched as I opened it. "Mom," it began, "I don't know how to begin apologizing. I failed you. I should have been there." I knew Mason was struggling, but I didn't realize how far he'd fallen. "Please, I know that I'm ashamed and deeply sorry. He's my son, but I know what he did is unforgivable. If you'll let me, I'd like to visit to help fix what he broke." I folded the letter and set it on the table, staring at it for a long time. Patrick wasn't to blame for Mason's choices, but the years of distance between us had grown like weeds. Maybe it was time to start trimming them back. That evening, I wrote him back. "Dear Patrick, I'm healing. Slowly but surely. You don't need to fix anything. Just come home and have dinner with me when you can. We'll talk, and that will be enough. Love, Mom." I sealed the envelope and felt a quiet weight lift from my shoulders. That night, Barrett stopped by to check on me. He brought along a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "You've had quite the journey, Judith," he said, settling into the armchair across from me. "I suppose I have," I replied, smiling. "And yet, it feels less like an ending and more like a beginning." He raised his glass. "To new beginnings, then." We toasted, and for a moment, the years melted away. The house was full again, not of noise or conflict, but of warmth and companionship. As the weeks passed, I began to understand something I hadn't before. Rebuilding wasn't about pretending the pain hadn't happened, it was about making peace with it. I left the scars where they were, because they reminded me of my strength. Sometimes, at night, I still thought about Mason. I wondered if he ever thought about me, if the weight of what he'd done kept him awake in that cold cell. I didn't wish him harm. In truth, I wished he'd learned the lesson life had tried to teach him, the one he refused to hear until it was too late. One evening, as I sat by the fire, I found myself whispering, "I forgive you, Mason." The words felt strange at first, but freeing. Forgiveness wasn't for him, it was for me. It was the final piece I needed to reclaim the quiet peace of my life. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. One evening, months later, I heard a knock on the door I almost didn't open. The sun had just set, and the last streaks of orange faded behind the hills. I'd been reading by the fire, wrapped in the same old knitted blanket Raymond bought me for our 25th anniversary. The knock startled me. It was soft, hesitant, the kind of knock made by someone who isn't sure they should be there. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. The house had grown used to silence, and I didn't want to disturb it. But something in my gut told me to get up. I placed my book aside, grabbed my cane, and opened the door. Standing on the porch was a woman I hadn't seen in years, Mason's mother, my daughter-in-law, Valerie. Her eyes were red, and she looked exhausted. Her once neat hair pulled back loosely, streaked with gray. "Valerie," I said quietly. "It's been a long time." She swallowed hard. "Hi, Judith. Her voice cracked. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course." She entered slowly, her eyes darting around the living room as if afraid of the memories waiting in the corners. I led her to the couch and poured her a cup of tea. Her hands trembled as she took it. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," she said finally. "I wasn't sure I did either," I admitted, my voice calm but not unkind. She nodded, setting the cup down. "I came because Mason wrote me from prison." The words hung between us, heavy as stone. "I see," I said softly. "And what did he say?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded letter. The envelope was worn, the paper creased and stained as if it had been read too many times. "He wanted me to bring this to you. He said it's important." I hesitated before taking it. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably his, uneven, hurried, but familiar. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Part of me didn't want to open it at all. But curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, made me tear the seal. The letter was short. "Grandma, I don't expect you to forgive me." I was angry and stupid. I told myself I was doing it for my future, but all I did was destroy everything good that was ever given to me. They tell me I'll get out in a year for good behavior. I don't know what kind of person I'll be when that happens. I just want you to know that I think about you every day. I hope your garden's still blooming. I'm sorry. Mason I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. Valerie's eyes filled with tears. "He's not the same," she said. "He's different now, broken maybe. But he talks about you all the time." I looked at the fire for a long while, listening to the quiet crackle. "I don't know if I can forgive him," I said truthfully. "Not because I want to hold on to anger, but because forgiveness feels too easy for what he did." Valerie nodded. "I understand. I just thought you should hear it from me. He's going to need help when he gets out, Judith." I sighed. "We all need help at some point, don't we? But help doesn't mean forgetting." We sat in silence for several minutes, the firelight flickering across the walls. The smell of chamomile tea hung in the air. There was sadness between us, but not bitterness, just the kind of shared grief that only family can know. "I never saw it happening," Valerie whispered. "He was always such a sweet boy. I don't know where it went wrong." "Greed hides in love sometimes," I said. "You don't see it until it's too late." She wiped her eyes and nodded. "I'm sorry for what you went through." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "It wasn't your fault. Mason made his choices. But thank you for coming." She gave a small, tearful smile. Would you like me to visit again sometime?" "Yes," I said after a moment. "I think I would." When she left, I stood by the window, watching her walk down the path, her coat pulled tight against the cold wind. In her posture, I saw something that reminded me of Mason, his uncertainty, his quietness when he thought no one was looking. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder what kind of man he might become after prison. I turned back toward the table, where his letter still lay under the lamplight. I picked it up one last time, reread the words, and then quietly placed it inside Raymond's old Bible on the mantel. It felt like the right place for it between pages that spoke of redemption and consequence in equal measure. That night, the house felt different again. Not haunted, not heavy, just still. I realized then that closure doesn't always come wrapped in joy. Sometimes it comes in quiet understanding, in the ability to breathe without bitterness. As I sat back down by the fire, I whispered, "Maybe one day, Mason. Maybe one day." Some wounds don't need words to heal. Silence does the work. Teaching was my first calling, and life was my last classroom. In the months after Valerie's visit, the days fell into a gentle rhythm. Morning sunlight poured through the curtains, the garden began to bloom again, and my steps grew steadier with each passing week. I found comfort in my routine breakfast by the window, tending the flowers, a phone call with Barrett every Sunday. But as the calm returned, so did the quiet thought that maybe it wasn't enough just to rebuild my life. Maybe I needed to share what I'd learned. People began to talk about my case around town. In small communities like ours, news travels fast, and everyone knew what had happened: the betrayal, the trial, the victory in court. But what they didn't know was how many others were quietly enduring something similar. I received letters, one from a widow in her 70s, whose niece had drained her savings, another from a man who'd signed away his home to a manipulative caretaker. They all said the same thing: I didn't think it could happen to me. I decided to do something about it. Barrett helped me set up a small weekly workshop at the community center, calling it Safe Hands, Protecting Your Legacy. The first day, only 4 people showed up, 3 women and 1 man. They were nervous, shy, unsure what to expect. I smiled and told them, "You're not here because you failed. You're here because you refused to stay silent." As the weeks went on, more people came. We talked about recognizing red flags, setting up legal protections, and trusting instincts over guilt. I didn't tell them every detail of my story, but I gave them enough to understand. I told them that family can love you and still hurt you, and that loving yourself enough to say no is not selfish, it's survival. Barrett sometimes joined the sessions, offering legal guidance. Watching him stand in front of the group, explaining the power of wills, trusts, and signatures, filled me with gratitude. He never treated me like a victim. He treated me like an equal. One afternoon, after a particularly emotional meeting, he pulled me aside. "Judith," he said, "you've helped more people than you realize. You've given them courage." I smiled. I only gave them what someone once gave me: a chance to be heard. Meanwhile, Raymond's foundation was thriving. The scholarship applications poured in, and the local paper ran an article about it. Widow turns betrayal into hope for students. The reporter had asked me for a quote, and I'd simply said, "You can't control who hurts you, but you can control what grows from it." The town began to see me differently, not as a frail widow, but as someone strong, someone who stood her ground. People I barely knew stopped me in the market just to say, "You're an inspiration." It felt strange at first. I hadn't done it for praise, but I realized that surviving something ugly can give others permission to survive too. One afternoon, as I sorted through old boxes in the attic, I found my old teaching journals. The margins were filled with notes, lessons I'd planned, reminders to encourage the shy students, small drawings from children I'd taught decades ago. Tucked between the pages was a faded note from Raymond. "You were born to teach, Judy. Never stop." I smiled through tears. I hadn't stopped. The classroom had just changed. One crisp morning, as I prepared for another workshop, I received a letter from the Department of Corrections. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the sender's name, Mason Miller. The envelope was plain and thin. I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. "Grandma, they told me about what you've been doing, the workshops, the scholarships. I read about it in the paper they leave in the common room. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to tell you that you're right. I've been taking classes here: business ethics, budgeting, even some psychology. For the first time, I'm trying to understand myself instead of making excuses. I don't know if I can ever make things right, but I want to try. Thank you for not giving up on life, even when I gave up on you." Mason. I sat there in silence, rereading the letter until the words blurred. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just let the weight of it sink in. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was the first real step. Later that week, during a workshop session, I shared a small part of his letter with the group. I didn't say who wrote it, only that forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. "Sometimes," I told them, "forgiveness is the quiet act of putting down a burden you never should have carried." After class, one of the older women, Helen, hugged me. "You're giving people their power back." That night, as I wrote in my journal, I realized she was right, but not just about them. I'd been giving myself my power back, one lesson at a time. When I finished writing, I placed Mason's letter in the same Bible where I'd kept the first one. 2 letters, side-by-side evidence that people could change, even when it took them a lifetime. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The tulips were in full bloom, swaying gently in the spring breeze. Life had come back to the soil, just as it had come back to me. Revenge had ended, but justice had just begun. On the anniversary of Raymond's death, I signed one final paper. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, like the beginning of a gentle farewell. I woke early, made myself tea, and laid out the documents Barrett had sent over the night before. They were the last of them papers that would finalize my estate, not for Mason, not even for Patrick, but for something larger than all of us. It had been almost 2 years since Mason's trial. He was still serving his sentence, and though we hadn't spoken since his last letter, I kept up with his progress through Valerie. She said he'd been attending counseling, working in the prison library, and saving a small part of his wages to pay restitution. I didn't know what kind of man he'd be when he came out, but I hoped life had finally started to teach him the lessons he refused to learn from me. I dressed carefully that morning, navy wool coat, silver brooch, the same scarf Raymond gave me the year before he passed. Barrett was waiting for me at his office, the same place where this long journey had begun. He stood when I entered, his smile warm and familiar. "Judith," he said, "always punctual." "I've learned not to waste time," I said, smiling faintly. He gestured for me to sit. On his desk lay a single folder, neatly bound. "Everything's in order," he explained. "This will finalize your trust and transfer your property into the foundation. After you sign, your home will officially become the Miller Learning Center, a place for underprivileged students to study, find mentorship, and build futures. It's a beautiful legacy." I traced my fingers along the edge of the papers. "Raymond always said this house should be full of laughter and learning. I think he'd approve. I know he would." I picked up the pen and signed my name, Judith Miller, steady and sure. There was no trembling this time, no fear, no anger, only peace. When I finished, Barrett stamped the papers, then handed me the final copy. "Congratulations," he said softly. "You've turned pain into purpose." "Not pain," I said. "Lessons." We talked for a while about the foundation's future, the first group of students, the volunteers who'd come to teach, the scholarship program that would continue long after I was gone. As we spoke, I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd done something lasting, something good. Before leaving, I turned back to him. "Barrett, thank you for everything. For believing in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself," he smiled. "You didn't need me to believe, Judith. You just needed someone to remind you that you still could." I walked out into the crisp spring air and paused on the courthouse steps. The wind carried the faint scent of lilac from the garden below, the same scent that used to fill our home when Raymond was alive. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. Back at the house, I made myself tea and sat at the kitchen table with a small notepad. I'd written a dozen drafts of what I wanted to say to Mason, but this one felt right. It wasn't long, just a few lines. "Mason, you once told me I was finished. You were right, in a way. I was finished with fear, with silence, with letting others write my story for me. But what you didn't understand is that endings and beginnings often share the same page." Grandma, I folded the note, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it. Barrett would deliver it to Mason when the time came. Afterward, I walked through each room of the house, touching the walls, the furniture, the small memories tucked into every corner. The piano Raymond loved, the bookshelf filled with old novels, the framed photographs of students I'd once taught. It all told a story not of loss, but of resilience. I ended my walk in the garden. The tulips had returned again, bright and full. I sat on the wooden bench near the fountain and watched the petals sway in the breeze. The same soil that once held my hidden jewelry box now held roots and color again. Life. Persistent and stubborn. Just like me. As I sat there, I thought about the path that had brought me here. The betrayal. The pain. The courtroom. And the redemption that followed. Each step, each scar, had shaped me into a woman who no longer lived in fear of being forgotten. The sun dipped low, painting the garden gold. I whispered softly, "We did it, Ray. It's all in order now." The wind stirred the leaves as if answering back. I stood, straightened my coat, and walked inside. On my desk sat the signed papers, the last ones I'd ever need to complete. The pen lay beside them, its ink still faintly wet. I placed my hand over the document and smiled. They said I was finished, but the truth is, I had only just begun.